All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February instalment of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party on this very spring-like morning, even though we have a week left of meteorological winter to go. Just some items of housekeeping. I'm Councillor Andrew Brown. I'll be chairing the meeting today for those viewing remotely, just so that you're aware of that. The officers who will be presenting items on the agenda, which can be accessed online, to the left and right of me, and the members in front of me who will make decisions and recommendations to Cabinet. So if I can just start with officers who would like to introduce themselves to my right, first of all.
Morning, I'm Mark Ashwell. I'm the Planning Policy Manager with the District Council.
Matthew Gutteridge, I'm a Senior Planning Officer.
To my left.
Ian Withington, I'm a team leader in planning policy.
Lauren Gregory, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. We have a full team. So I'll just formally welcome members of the public to the meeting who are viewing remotely. We don't appear to have any members of the public in the chamber today. So before we start the formal business, fire alarm, we're not expecting a practice, so if it goes off, it's for real. I think we all know here what the drill is on that. Being a serial offender, can I just ask people to either mute or switch off their mobile phones? And if I can think ahead, I'll even remind you to switch them back on when we finish the meeting in a very timely manner, hopefully. We will consider a break around 11 o'clock if we're not finished by then, and I suspect by 11:30 perhaps rather than 11. And I suspect we won't be finished by then, given the track record of this particular working party. If past experience is anything to go by. Yes, yes, that's what we want. Right, so turning to the agenda, Lauren, if we can start with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Grave-Jones, Councillor Gay, Councillor Pearce, Councillor Punchard, Councillor Stockton and Councillor Toy, with Councillor Wendy Fredericks present as a substitute for Councillor Grave-Jones and Councillor Victoria Holliday present as a substitute for Councillor Punchard.
Thank you for substituting this morning to those substitutes who are here. Item 2, public questions. Don't believe we have any. No. So if we turn to page 1 and the minutes of the meeting on Monday, the 16th of January, if we just go through those for accuracy, as it were. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just checking where all this ends because it's quite lengthy, aren't they? Page 8, page 9, 10, 11, and 12. Anybody any comments to make? Corrections? Typed word perfectly then. Excellent, thank you very much. I'll sign those later on when we get an opportunity. Item 4, I better get a proposal and a seconder for those minutes. Beg your pardon. Proposed Councillor Kershaw. Councillor Heinrich seconded. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Item 4, urgent business items. Do we have any?
I haven't received any, Chairman.
No, thank you very much. Item 5, declarations of interest, pecuniary or otherwise, as per the guidance on pages 15 to 20. Do we have any? Speak now or forevermore hold your peace. No, we don't have any. Thank you very much. Number 6, update on matters from previous meetings. Don't believe we've got any updates. No, I'm getting shakes of the head. 7, any other business at the discretion of the chairman? No, I haven't got any. So we move to the first of the three main items on the agenda. Item 8, Norfolk Coast A and B updated management plan. Now we have a little difficulty here because the officer that's produced this report is not presently with us. I'm proposing to defer it to the last item of the day, and hopefully we will have something that we can present to you, because we don't want you doing a deep dive into this report, as I'm sure you all have read assiduously, to have nothing at the end of it. So we need to reward you with something, but if we defer that till the end of the meeting. So we move smartly instead to item 9, National Planning Policy Framework, consultation on proposed changes, and the government's latest guidance in a series of NPPF releases. They do like to keep us on our toes at the relevant departments of government. If I hand over to Mr. Ashwell, where you go, Mark?
So I'm going to be referring to pages 99 in the report pack onwards. Just by way of setting the scenes, the government is currently out to consultation on a range of proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. They will sit alongside probably 2 or 3 further rounds of consultation programme for this year. One on the, I'll call it the LURB, Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is currently making its way through Parliament, and there'll be various provisions in that which no doubt will require further changes. Government has said that this consultation on the NPPF is a sort of interim measure to introduce some fairly quick wins, pending further more fundamental reform, perhaps later in the year. And we're promised at some stage, if it survives this current consultation, a consultation exercise on what they call standard development management policies, which I'll refer to later on when I go through the proposed changes. So we're going to see this current consultation, which runs till early March, then probably sometime towards the middle of the year, I suspect 2 further consultations on NPPF proper again, and whatever emerges out of, if it does emerge out of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. All leading to, I won't say a root and branch, but a fairly fundamental review of planning. And in terms of local plan preparation and the business of the working party, at the end of it all, the intention would be to have a much more streamlined, strategic, quicker to prepare document, which is subject to regular review every 5 years or so, rather than what we've got at the moment, which is a all-embracing belts and whistles sort of exercise. Takes several years to prepare, tends to be on the books for 10 or 15 years and gets reviewed infrequently. So we're looking at a much sort of sharper focused strategic sort of plan in the future, subject to ongoing review. That's government's intention. That's what they're currently consulting on. So I'm going to run through in my usual fashion. I'll say I'll do it quickly and then I won't do it quickly. The main provisions in the consultation, with the intention that hopefully at the end of that you will agree the thrust of our response to the consultation and do the usual and allow myself to have delegated powers to just finalise the wording and submit the responses in due course. So I'm going to start at page 99 and then I'll work my way through, and I suggest I probably present the whole lot and then take any questions at the end, otherwise it could be a very lengthy exercise. So this first provision, government says it will review the standard methodology. I expect you're fed up with hearing about the standard methodology. So this is the formula that government requires local authorities to follow when it's trying to establish how many houses will be required in the future. Current formula says, take the 2014 household projections, apply a buffer, and you should deliver the resulting number. And the resulting number is described as one you must follow unless there are exceptional circumstances. So essentially government determines through this formula how many houses should be built in each district authority. North Norfolk doesn't follow the standard methodology. It's one of the councils that says the circumstances locally fit into that exceptional circumstances category. We say in terms that the 2014 household projections aren't reliable. They incorporate errors. They're not a sound basis for projecting forward future need, and therefore we use an alternative methodology. Oh, apologies. Just turn my volume down so that doesn't happen again. So before Christmas, there was a widespread sort of, well, quite a lot of press coverage saying the standard methodology was about to go, that it was going to get abolished. People got quite excited about the prospect of it disappearing. You'll see from what I say up top of page 100, government's not intending to get rid of the standard methodology. So the formula will remain in guidance. We will continue to have to take the 2014 household projections, do a little bit of mathematics with it, apply an uplift and derive a number. What's changing is that number is now being referred to, or will be referred to in the NPPF, as an advisory starting point, not a number that you should use in all but exceptional circumstances. So essentially, we think when the barristers and the legal people will have a field day about what that actually means in practice, but it appears to say that local authorities have got a little bit more wriggle room. They don't have to demonstrate that the circumstances are exceptional or different. They just have to say that there is good reason for departing from the standardized approach. You'll still need evidence. You'll still need to convince an inspector that these circumstances justify departures from the methodology. But it seems to us that there's a move to give local authorities a little bit more of an ability to argue that an approach which is derived from local evidence would trump this national methodology. And we'll see how that works out through local plan examinations and through planning appeals and so on. Bit disappointing. We'd like them to have just got rid of the methodology completely and allow local authorities to establish their own housing targets on the basis of locally produced need. It's a step in the right direction. So I think we should be expressing disappointment, support the provision, but say it doesn't go far enough would be the terms of the response, that ideally those matters around housing targets should really be set locally, not with the benefit of a national formula. You know, I will say the formula is so far removed from the real world, you have to question why we're even using it, to be honest with you. It produces some extremely unusual and difficult to justify figures. And we're not alone as a council in arguing that the methodology produces the wrong number. It's absolute cannon fodder for public inquiries at local plans and planning appeals up and down the country. There's probably more authorities arguing that they fit into the exceptional circumstances category than there are who are content with the result of the methodology. And it seems we're going to be stuck with it until at least the results of the 2021 census are published, which don't appear until 2024. And censuses are seen as a sort of benchmarks because they're real world figures rather than projections. And when government has the 2024 census, it'll be able to say with some certainty whether previous projections were right or wrong, because they would have counted people. Anyway, so the tone of the response we're recommending there is, yep, step in the right direction, small step in the right direction, but disappointed that it's not gone further and removed the methodology completely. That's the first of about 30 items. It took me 10 minutes, didn't it? I'll try and be a bit quicker with some of the others. Bottom of page 100, more explicit reference in planning guidance yet to come about what the local characteristics would be which would justify departures from the methodology. So although there's going to be more flexibility, we don't know on what grounds. There's reference in the consultation document that islands of elderly might be a good reason for departing from the standard methodology. And I assume that means if you've got lots of old people, then birth rates and things like that are going to be very strange. You know, old people don't tend to have children. Or the reference to islands of elderly might be the Isle of Wight. I mean, it might be a physical island. I do not know, but government intends to provide guidance as to what circumstances local authorities might be able to plead in mitigation if they want to use a different number. In a way, I think that's a bit of a slippery slope, because unless the guidance is extremely exhaustive and cites every single example, you're then going to have arguments about your particular reasons for departing aren't listed in the guidance and therefore you can't do it. So I think it's an unenviable task to try and provide a definitive set of guidance as to why local authorities might want to use a different number. Hence, the underlying presumption is we should be allowed to get on with it without having a formula at all. That, you know, we understand population growth and so on in North Norfolk, and we ought to be able to present a figure to an inspector and justify it through the evidence that we have without being shackled by a formulaic sort of approach. Item 3 there, not really applicable to us, that uncharacteristically high density might outweigh the requirement to meet the housing target. That must be a good thing. I mean, that's sort of areas, you know, inner city areas that have not got lots of brownfield sites they're already built on, where in order to hit a housing target, the only option is to go upwards, results in some quite significant sort of urbanizing impacts. And government wants to make clear that that would be a reason for saying, well, we can't deliver our target because the consequences are unacceptable. I would have thought that would be an argument you'd already put in front of the inspector, to be honest with you, but it's a welcome change. Next one is similar. Local authorities no longer have to, not that they have been, but don't have to review their greenbelt boundaries in order to accommodate growth. So it's underscoring that national presumption that the greenbelt, we just need to make the point, the greenbelt is a specific designated area. It's not countryside, it's not green fields. Greenbelt only exists around urban areas in the country and not in North Norfolk, so it's not relevant to us. But there's been this tug of war going on in the background where high levels of need in the home counties could only get delivered if you release greenbelt land. And what government now is saying is there's no need to do that. It does raise implications potentially for authorities like us that the growth has got to go somewhere. So if it doesn't go into the greenbelt, local authorities decide not to review their greenbelt boundaries, the numbers nevertheless need to get addressed, and you get this trickling out effect, ripple effect, where other authorities end up taking the strain. And personally, I think there would be a good argument to say that local authorities should review their greenbelt boundaries. Not all greenbelt is beautiful countryside. It just happens to be geographically around the edges of big conurbations. And some of that land is highly sustainable and located in a position with, you know, good transport connections, employment opportunities, and so on. And to my mind, would be a better place to build than this ripple effect of development getting decanted elsewhere. So there is a risk behind that provision. My computer's died on me. I'm going to go to the old reliable paper version. Five, common sense measure here. Councils are judged on housing delivery, and if they deliver too many, they don't get any benefit for it. The target stays the same. So what this provision would say is if you have a year where lots of houses are built, that surplus can be taken off of the target in future years. Very straightforward. You'd thought that would be absolutely a given, really, but for the last 10 years, there was no benefit in delivering more houses than were required. It did nothing to your target at all. You had to carry on, pedaling even faster to stay up, sort of thing. Item 6, very relevant for plan making and could turn out to be the most fundamental change. Local plans, when they go for examination, have to be justified. It's one of the formal sort of legal tests, if you like. Your plan must be justified. And to justify plans, local authorities are obligated to do two major things. One is to consider a load of options. How did we get to where we got to? Have we identified the best option? Is often the way of justifying what you're doing. And that results in local authorities appraising multiple alternatives to do things. Some of them, I have to say, quite spurious alternatives that are made up. If we did X, why wouldn't we do Y or Z? And Y or Z are never on the table. They're never sensible options. But you go through that process of discounting alternatives in order to justify what you're doing, which takes inordinate amounts of time and energy. And the other thing local authorities do is they prepare vast amounts of supporting evidence for their plans: retail studies, employment studies, population studies, environmental studies, a whole sort of plethora of background studies. Now, they won't disappear completely. They'll still need to be provided. But the formal test of having to justify your plan, if that goes, it sets a much lower threshold than is currently the case. It's not a recipe for local authorities to do whatever they like, but it diminishes the importance of the supporting evidence and allows common sense to prevail, rather than, as I say, wheelbarrows full of supporting documents having to be prepared. Number 7, not relevant to us. Urban areas get this uplift on their housing targets. The government said urban areas are mainly the places where housing should go. And in order for the national target to be met, it's layered on an additional percentage in the 20 largest urban authorities and said you should be doing a bit more than everybody else. 35% additional uplift. That will stay in new guidance. And again, for the reasons I outlined previously, probably a sensible thing to do. Bigger urban areas are generally better places to build development. Another big one, number 8, duty to cooperate will disappear. The significance of this is the duty to cooperate is a legal requirement. It must be met, and planning inspectors have very little discretion at local plan examination. They ask a question: has the legal duty been met or hasn't it been met? And if it hasn't been met, your plan fails legally, goes no further. It's an absolute trump card in terms of current legislation. So local authorities must comply with the duty to cooperate. Intention is to get rid of it and introduce a further soundness test, which they're calling alignment. Nobody quite knows what alignment is, but the sort of issues that would probably get dealt with under an alignment test would be, let's use the Houghton example. Is there adequate school capacity in Houghton to support the growth that might happen over our boundary in an adjacent district? And what have the two authorities done to ensure that their plans are aligned and result in sensible development? So that understanding what the neighbouring authority is doing, so we don't build a dual carriageway to the edge of North Norfolk and then the next authority doesn't do their bit to put the other link in. Sensible strategic planning across boundaries, but not having to meet the duty to cooperate, having to meet some sort of alignment test. Number 9. I'm gonna cut this short, this presentation now. So 5-year land supply and housing targets. There are various provisions in here. At the moment, when you demonstrate a 5-year land supply, you count 5 years worth of your housing target. That's how many houses you should be providing. And then you apply all sorts of buffers to it. 5% buffer, 10% buffer, 20% buffer, depending on where you are on delivery. And you are judged against how many houses are built through the housing delivery test. So if you say you're going to build 500 houses a year and you only build 350, then one of the mechanisms you have to do is apply an even bigger buffer to the 5-year land supply requirements. So essentially you have to make up the ground over the next few years. Government wants to streamline and simplify all of that by just saying to councils, demonstrate a 5-year land supply, that's 5 years worth of growth. No buffers, no added on bits, deliver your 5 years. We recognise that there might be periods during that 5-year period where you don't deliver as many as you anticipated, market conditions, building conditions, COVID pandemics or whatever. So rather than you being exclusively judged on housing delivery, under the housing delivery test, we're going to judge you on planning permissions granted. So the bit that we actually do becomes a performance standard rather than us being judged by people building houses. That's a very beneficial change. And I would argue really what local authorities ought to be judged on is permissions granted, not houses built. Although we've got an influence in terms of houses being built, our influence is relatively modest. So if you look at, why are we being penalised for other people not building homes when we grant lots of planning permissions? And government has accepted that and said, moving forwards, the housing delivery test will also look at planning permissions granted, not just houses built. And all of those things are very beneficial. I'm going to touch on two things that I think we should object to, and then I'm going to take any questions, I think. The first is government's intention to introduce a standard set of national development management policies. So our local plan has strategic policies in it. How many houses, where will they be, what's our approach to employment delivery, what's our approach to protecting the environment. They're all sort of strategic policies. And there are a whole range of what are in the industry described as development management policies that deal with very small details. Should somebody get planning permission for an agricultural workers dwelling? It's not particularly strategic, but you need a policy on it. What is our approach to development in conservation areas? I'll use an example. Those sort of localized things. The government wants to produce a set of standard national development management policies for all those areas of policy where the whole country would be doing much the same thing. So we all have policies that say don't build in flood risk areas. It's common sense. We all have policies that say if you propose development in a conservation area, the statutory test is to preserve or enhance. We all have policies about the AONB, which if you look at them, broadly say the same thing. And government thinks it would be beneficial to produce a national set of those policies, so there'd be no need for those types of policies in local plans. They would amend the statutory basis for making planning decisions, which at the moment says determine a planning application in accordance with the provision of the local plan. It'd be modified to say determine a planning application in accordance with the development plan and the national development management policies. So they would be elevated up to become essentially part of the decision-making process. And further, and the bit that we should object to strongly, where there is a conflict between local policies and national policies should take precedence. And we think that cuts against democracy, undermines the plan-making process that's been through examination. It opens up the prospect that a minister could introduce a new development management policy through Parliament in relatively short order, and that would trump the content of an examined local plan that had perhaps just been freshly prepared. Now, it's flagged this provision in terms of streamlining the process. Local plans take 4 or 5 years to prepare. If we got rid of all of those development management policies, wouldn't it be better? All of the contention in local plan examinations and preparation is to do with the strategic content of the plan, nothing to do with the development management policies. They go through on the nod largely. Inspectors do not spend lots of time looking at agricultural workers' dwellings policies or any of that sort of stuff. So the notion that removing those development management policies from a local plan would expedite the process in some way, I think is a fiction. all of the contention in our plan is about growth in small growth villages. It's about the allocations. It's about whether the housing target is too high or too low. Development management policy has got nothing to do with any of that. So that content of the plan, that strategic content of the plan would remain, and that's the bit that takes time. We don't think there's really much benefit in removing development management policies in terms of efficiency. And in any event, it would undermine that whole notion of locally prepared policies and local democracy. So we think we should object to that. One last thing in terms of responding negatively to the consultation, there are transitional provisions which attempt to take account of the fact that local authorities have been preparing local plans for the last 4 or 5 years, and government wants them to continue. And it doesn't want everybody to down tools and say, let's wait for this new simplified regime to come into effect. You know, in a couple of years' time, we might be able to do a streamed down plan with only strategic policies in it quite quickly. Let's wait. And some authorities have already taken that decision, and they are waiting, and they're looking to see what new system might emerge. So government has said, to try and stop that happening, we want the local authorities to continue to submit their plans, and under the transitional arrangements which are proposed, those plans would get examined in the normal way under the current regime. And we want to say that's a bit of nonsense, really. If government thinks that the duty to cooperate is too stiff, if it thinks the modifications to the standard methodology are required, if it thinks streamlined policies are the way to go, then introduce those tests now in relation to current plans and expedite the process of current plan preparation. Don't wait until the next round of plans come in before those tests get introduced. So if it makes sense to get rid of the duty to cooperate in 2 years' time, it must make sense today. The same rationale applies. So why not allow current plans to benefit from those changes, which will ease the process of local plan examination substantially? So we'd like to reply on the basis that the modifications, the ones that we support, are introduced without further delay, and we don't have to wait 2 years or whatever it might be until we start preparing a new plan, and 5 years until that new plan gets adopted. Let's take advantage of those changes now. I'm going to leave it then if you want to ask any questions about anything that I've missed in the papers, but broadly that is the sort of tone of the comments we'd like to submit. Lots of detailed things which are beneficial, not to support. 2 or 3 big areas we'd like to make fairly strong representations that they're not a good idea.
Thank you, Mark, for that. I just want to make a few remarks. First and foremost, I think this council, Mark's team particularly, took a decision to challenge the standard methodology calculation, relying on a census in 2014, which had a direction of travel in population growth, which hasn't been replicated in more recent census. Particularly, I think 2016 was one, was it? And then we've had the national census in 2021.
Yeah, so we get household and population forecasts about every 2 years. So we've got 2014, 2016, 2018. We haven't got the 2020 ones yet because they did the census instead. We'll get another set probably in 2024. The highest figure produced was 2014. And all the evidence that you see post 2014 suggests that figure was far too high. And it is technically wrong and been shown to be wrong in North Norfolk. And we've won planning appeals, several big public inquiries, on the basis that the 2014 figures were incorrect. I spent 2 days in informal hearing arguing whether the degree of them being incorrect, not whether they were incorrect or not, everybody in the room accepted that they were incorrect, whether the extent to which they were incorrect was exceptional circumstances or not. How far wrong were they? and how far wrong were they in comparison to every other authority in the country that was making the same argument. That's how, I'll use the word ridiculous, it gets. Everybody in the room knows the figures are wrong, but you're arguing how wrong are they? In North Norfolk, we've been successful in arguing that the 2016 figures are better. They're more current, more up to date, and they resolve largely a lot of the problems that are embedded into the 2014 numbers. And we would make the same argument at the local plan inquiry. And now we'll be increasingly confident because that exceptional circumstances test may have gone by the time we get to our examination, and the evidential basis for an alternative approach will be in play. Rather than us having to say we're really unusual, we can say we're a little bit unusual, and that will be sufficient.
So it remains a mystery why in 2023 we're still using census figures from 2014, given that some plans which are now being held back because of the transitional arrangements might not come into effect until 2025, and then it'll be more than a decade out of date.
The
the
underlying sort of proposition for using the 2014 figures and sticking with the 2014 figures is certainty. If government says with absolute certainty this is the number, it narrows the gap for argument. Would be the logic behind it. Government makes clear these are the numbers you use, other than in exceptional circumstances, was intended to provide clarity and certainty about expectation. But it did not stop local authorities arguing that their circumstances were different for whatever reason. So I think it was well intentioned at the time. In 2016 they said let's keep the 2014 numbers. We're now in 2020, whatever it is, 3. That was 7 years ago, and that logic around certainty, to my mind, has now disappeared. It's time for a review. And to be fair to government as well, the 2021 census does provide a benchmark. It is a real world look at who's living out there rather than a projection from a long time ago. It says, in 2014, we projected there'd be 100,000 people here. If you go and count them and there's only 85,000 people here, the original projection had something wrong with it, or there's 15,000 people missing. So benchmarking the next round of plans to the census results is a very sensible thing to do, but we won't get those until 2024. There's still a bit of waiting.
So we have about 1 million planning permissions where building hasn't occurred. Unbuilt planning permissions nationally, and not a lot is really being done about that in this NPPF, as far as I can see, about encouraging through the methodology at any rate. And we've got an annual target nationally of 300,000 dwellings to be built, which often never gets achieved. And the government don't impose a buffer on that figure that they impose on local authorities. Is that what we're saying?
I feel like I'm defending the government here.
Please do. Someone needs to.
Well, if the country needs 240,000 houses or 250,000 houses a year, there is no sense whatsoever in producing a set of local plans to deliver 250,000 houses when 20% of them will never get built. So the national target will always be higher than the sum total of all of the local plans in the country, because you have to build in plan failure and buffers into the number. And there's a great deal of skepticism about whether the country needs, I think we know that the country doesn't need 330,000 houses a year, but that figure is not a needs figure. It's a target to deliver that everybody, including government, knows is not going to be achieved. So you always set out to deliver more because there's going to be some failure. In North Norfolk, the last local plan did not deliver every allocation in the book. There are allocations that are out there now that we allocated in 2011, where there's very little prospect of development taking place. There is always a degree of failure in plans, and that justifies setting a higher national target. What the debate is the difference between what's actually needed, say 240, 250,000 houses, and 330 is a big gap. As you say, I don't think there's anybody, even in government, that thinks that this country will deliver 330,000 houses year in, year out. We've not got anywhere near that since the post-war period, when local authorities were building more houses than private developers. Very little prospect of us getting anywhere near that number, I would say.
Well, it's a bit of a concern that the methodology is a system more honoured in the breach, as we say in the law, than in the observance. So it would seem, and that we continue to perpetuate that by this new framework. Anyway, I'm sure there's some logic to it somewhere, but it escapes me. Right, I'll throw it open to the floor. Councillor Dixon, I think you already have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In respect of the 5-year land supply, I welcome the change to be based on permissions. I'm just wondering, though, whether from our perspective and what influence we have on the delivery of homes, whether that actually goes far enough. We have the ability to allocate land, and that's what we do in the local plan. And after that point, we kind of become powerless, really, because whether a permission follows on those allocations is beyond our reach. So we can't actually influence whether we get to the permission stage. We're still, if you like, a link missing there. And I just wonder, whilst it's a step in the right direction, I just wonder if it goes far enough, and whether or not we could be based more fairly on a 5-year land supply based on the allocations that we've made. And those allocations, for one reason or other, have not been developed. Now, I'm mindful that in the process of making those allocations, developers are involved. They have the opportunity of being consultants, saying whether they are or are not realistic, and whether they would have an interest in, or for them to, they can make their protests in that way. So I think that there's scope there to go another step further forward and say, we've made proper allocations for the delivery of sufficient land, more than sufficient land to meet our targets. The fact that that hasn't happened is beyond our scope.
There's a couple of things in there. So when you're preparing your local plan, you have to do the delivery test. So you have to allocate land that you're confident is going to get delivered. And there's a lot of work goes on, behind the scenes in discussing with developers and landowners the extent to which we think sites will get delivered. There are clearly examples of changes of circumstances where things don't happen as you might anticipate they would do. What government is saying, one of the other provisions here, is if you've got an adopted local plan, hot off the press, it's got 5-year land supply in it. That's one of the tests of examination. The inspector will say, where's all your growth going? Have you got 5 years worth of land supply in this plan? And if the inspector's conclusion is yes, no need to show a 5-year land supply outside of the plan preparation process for the first 5 years. So essentially, your plan is your 5-year land supply, and you are not judged against it for the first 5-year period. And then at the end of the 5 years, you're into plan review anyway. These new streamlined plans are going to be subject to cyclical, ongoing, almost continuous review processes. So you'll get that protection in the first 5 years. And that protection comes in the form of disapplying the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So, when we don't have a 5-year land supply, you get a planning application, you have to apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development. In other words, grant permission for unplanned growth. That will no longer apply to those local authorities who have adopted a plan in the last 5 years. So again, it's a welcome bit of protection from the worst impacts of that presumption being applied. The problem with the way that the presumption is applied is, in order to refuse planning permission under the presumption, you have to show that the adverse impacts of development significantly outweigh the benefits. So that gobbledygook means you have to approve unsatisfactory development just in order to keep a number up. Clearly, if we get rid of that presumption when you've got an up-to-date local plan, that reinstates the precedence of the local plan for decision-making processes and underscores the whole sort of plan-led approach, and is a measure to improve sort of community confidence in the way that the planning process is supposed to work. Plan it, consult on it, get it adopted, and then deliver a plan. There shouldn't be much scope for delivering things outside of that plan process. And that particular provision would help in that regard. So I think that's good.
Avid readers of this report will have noted that we have a slight concession because we're at Reg 19 stage, aren't we? And ready to refer our plan for inspection at the meeting or council meeting on the 1st of March. One would hope that, and therefore in the meantime, we only need to establish a 4-year.
Yeah. So again, government was mindful that introducing a new planning process might result in a bit of a hiatus of plan making. Local authorities might say, hang on, we need a soft pedal here, we need to reconsider where we're going. And as a consequence, their aged plans, which they're trying to extend the life of, may not have sufficient land supply left in them. So government's saying during that transitional period, for those authorities that have already passed Regulation 18 and Regulation 19, i.e. us, our type of authority that's got a plan that's quite well advanced, for the next couple of years, there'd only be a need to show a 4-year land supply rather than the 5-year land supply. So it's sort of saying, yeah, there's going to be some hiccups, there's going to be some bumps along the road, people might decide to go a bit slower. And during that period, we'll go for a 4-year land supply, not a 5-year land supply. Again, a beneficial change. You could argue for a 3-year land supply or a 2.5, where would you draw the line? But saying that authorities might like to take a bit of time, they might like to review their plans and think about where they're going. We accept that will take a little bit of time. And during that period, 4-year land supply rather than 5-year land supply will be the order of the day.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that Mark has commented on the merit of pushing for the 5-year or whatever for land supply to be based on allocations as well, or take account of allocations. I understand the 5 years into the plan we are protected, that's helpful, but beyond the 5 years into the plan, I think that's where our risk is.
Okay, I think I understand the point that's being made. So your 5-year land supply is your future pipeline of housing delivery. And that future pipeline of housing delivery comes from lots of sources, ranging from a twinkle in somebody's eye who thought I might build on that bit of land, all the way up to I'm under construction, but I'm not built. So along that conveyor belt, you've got, I might like to build on this bit of land. I might be an option in a local plan. I'm definitely an option in a local plan. I'm now allocated in a local plan. I have outline planning permission. I have full planning permission. I've started to build. And along that conveyor belt, across its entirety, everything counts towards your 5-year land supply, provided you can show it's deliverable within the 5-year period. So even the man who's got a twinkle in his eye, who thinks he might build something, he can get into that 5-year land supply category if we can conclude that there's a good prospect that within that 5-year period, that twinkle in his eye turns into a house for somebody to live in. And that conveyor belt is continuously moving around. The built ones are falling off the end, they're built, and the new ones are coming on the other end, another twinkle in somebody's eye that gets converted to a planning permission and so on. So it's a continuous rolling cycle of 5 years worth of building. And the acid test to be included on that conveyor belt is there a realistic prospect of delivery? So we have to test all of the various stages and say, is there a realistic prospect of delivery? When our local plan gets examined and goes through an examination by an independent inspector who concludes there is a realistic prospect of this allocation being built in the next 5 years, we add it to our 5-year land supply. At this stage, It's our proposal. We think it's a good idea. We have a view on delivery, but it's not been tested by an inspector. So it's a little bit early to stick it onto the conveyor belt. It's in the reserve pile. We're close to being able to put it on. And then when the local plan is adopted, everything comes out of that reserve pile and goes onto the conveyor belt. And when it's built, it drops off the end and we replace it with another set of allocations in another 5 years' time. And so the cycle keeps on turning. So I think it's right that a 5-year land supply is only a 5-year land supply if there's a realistic prospect of something being built in the 5-year period. That's a fair test to apply. You can't have that conveyor belt stacked up with fanciful ideas about things that may happen, you know, in 20 or 30 years' time. Local plans look over 10 or 15-year periods so that when you run out your first 5 years, you've already got years 5 to 10 and 10 to 15 in your plan, and they're progressing through the system, getting their planning permissions. So you're always in a position to try and top up the supply. Now, our 5-year land supply position don't currently have a 5-year land supply. What happened is nutrient neutrality came along and the conveyor belt stopped turning. Essentially, the brakes are on. We're not churning houses out off the end of the conveyor belt anymore. They're all stuck in the middle until nutrient neutrality gets resolved and that conveyor belt starts moving again. We'll be in the current position that we are, of not being able to demonstrate a supply. The tools available for us to make house builders build houses are very modest. You know, I've said before, there's not a lot of evidence of deliberate land banking in North Norfolk. Most people get planning permissions. They start construction within 2 or 3 years, which is a reasonable turnaround period. There are various provisions in here which allow local authorities to take the character of the applicant into account when they grant planning permissions. So we've got serial offenders who are very clearly getting lots of planning permissions and just sitting on them. In the future, it appears as a result of these provisions, we'll be able to say, no, Mr. Smith, you haven't played by the rules. We're not going to give you a further planning consent. Presumably in the hope and expectation that that site will then move on to somebody else who's more likely to build on it. You know, the penalties of saying no to an applicant largely fall on the person who needs a house to live in. And there's not much incentive to refuse planning permissions, even if you're not confident about the character of the applicant. What you want to be doing is still granting the consents. So I'm skeptical about any mechanisms which are intended to accelerate build out rates based on the behavior of individual applicants and companies. I think there's so many loopholes and ways to get around those sort of things. I largely think build out rates are determined by market conditions in any event. You know, builders don't build houses unless they're very confident they can sell them. And the nature of the house building industry is cyclical, boom and bust. When times are good, put up a typical house in about 2.5 weeks or something ridiculous. When things go slow, they withdraw from sites, mothball them, and don't build houses because they can't sell them. So I think it's largely a market-driven industry, and the levers that we have are very modest. It's all about granting plenty of permissions. So there's as many houses as possible on that moving conveyor belt. So there's multiple choices to deliver the end product, and making a range of sites, small, large, available, and supportive policies for barn conversions and other things all have an impact on the pace of delivery.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
But I think probably a need to just modify the recommendation to get to cabinet. And I think at the moment the recommendation refers to responding via cabinet. If there is a date, then I will take it through to cabinet, but this response needs to be in by the 3rd of March. So I'm going to ask members to delegate the final response to myself, if necessary, through Andrew in the normal way. And then I'll circulate the response once it's drafted.
So a couple of things. Any further questions, Councillor Holiday?
Thank you, Chair. Could I persuade you to comment on number 3? That's the densification.
3.
Yeah, densification item. You say it's unlikely to be applicable, but is it not applicable to certain places like high growth villages that complain about this all the time? And wouldn't it be quite nice just to support it anyway? Thanks.
Right. So I don't think we should confuse two things. Density as a necessity to hit a target is what government's talking about here, where there's no option other than to build at much higher densities. Government is saying you don't need to do that just to deliver a target. There are density considerations got nothing to do with delivering housing targets. They're form and character and design considerations, which are relevant and are not touched by this at all. So it's a slightly different use of the term densification. We in North Norfolk, I don't think would say in order to deliver our housing target, we've got to deliver at unrealistically high densities. You know, we've got 165,000 hectares of agricultural land, some of which can be built on without cramming lots of houses into villages and towns. So there's a balance to be struck there. But it's not that, that's not what that provision's about, Victoria. It's about those authorities. Let's use Norwich City Council as an example. They've got no option in order to hit their housing target. They've either got to go upwards or they've got to strike a deal with their neighbours. And government is saying, in order to hit that target, you don't have to build skyscrapers, if you can say they're inappropriate in your area.
Recommends cabinet the authority responds to the consultation as outlined in this report.
Chairman, just to advise, the resolution would have to stand as it is. The working party do not have delegated decisions. Everything has to feed to cabinet. The working party do not have the right. It can only recommend to cabinet to make decisions.
So if it doesn't hit government by the 3rd of March, is it guillotined or?
No, I imagine if we were to submit late-ish representations, you know, within a few days of closing, they would probably get in. I don't know. I mean, the comments we're making here will not be unusual up and down the country. I think North Norfolk should respond, but it wouldn't be the be all and end all if our representations were ruled out. I do wonder though whether this is a decision. I'm not sure whether it's a decision responding to a consultation and whether the working party can do that in its own name without going to cabinet at all.
Everything the working party do has to go through cabinet.
Right.
So it's been suggested to me that we perhaps should submit a holding response.
Okay.
And then as soon as cabinet meets, which I think is on the 6th, isn't it?
Okay.
You can have it drafted, ready to ping
Yeah.
on the 6th of March.
Okay. Let's do it. Let's leave the headache with me to sort out cabinet references. If the decision needs to go to cabinet, if cabinet is after the date, then I'll resolve how we submit something before the date to make sure that it happens. But if we can't change the recommendation, we'll leave it as it is.
Sorry, that's my fault, microphone. If I can hand over to Kathy Batchelor, who's our landscape officer.
This report is seeking a recommendation by this working party to Cabinet for endorsement of the updated AONB management plan for use as a material consideration in the determining of planning applications. Just to give you some background, the council has a statutory duty as a partner in the Norfolk Coast Partnership to prepare and publish a plan for the management of the AONB and to review that plan at intervals of not more than 5 years. So recently there's been quite a restructure of the AONB management. Just for clarification, the partners in the core management group of the Norfolk Coast AONB are Norfolk County Council, Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, Great Yarmouth Borough Council, North Norfolk District Council and Natural England. So all of these partners have been, we've been working to do just a slight refresh of the existing management plan, really so that it can be used for the next couple of years. There is an intention to do a major new management plan following the Glover review, which looked at the whole management and the way that all the AONBs in the country work. There was a recommendation for a changed way of putting together these management plans. There is guidance coming out later this year for that. And it is the intention to really do a deep change and refresh of the management plan. But this slight update really just keeps the management plan live until that is done. The main changes, which are set out in 1.5 of the report, it's really just updating in accordance with national planning policy, updated environmental agricultural policy following Brexit, updating in accordance with progress on local plans from all the relevant councils, any new supplementary planning documents such as our North Norfolk Landscape Character Assessment, new policy such as the mitigation on and avoidance measures for recreational pressures, coastal erosion and climate change. Really, that's all I've got to say. Are there any questions at all?
Just before I go to members, well, I've got one or two.
Okay.
For those who can't quite fathom why we don't have an international dark skies designation in North Norfolk, when we know that we are the third most biodiverse area in the entire country, if Chris Packham is to be believed, when he informed us of that the year before that. We have two areas, High Kelling and Weybourne, is it?
Wiverton.
Sorry, Wiverton, beg your pardon. Is there a case for proceeding or reviewing whether we should have an international dark skies designation?
I think it is.
Because it's causing a lot of problems, isn't it? You know, on the shop floor. By that I mean in the development committee. You know, we routinely get planning applications coming before us where light pollution is on the pun, a burning issue. Would it help if we had, because they have it down in Cornwall, don't they?
There are certain, there's places like Kielder Water, I know in the north, have the international designation. I mean, I know there's an intention to try and get other designations within our AONB. our local plan policy, you know, our policy EN1 specifically talks about dark skies.
Mm,
Our policy EN2 looks at retention of nocturnal character.
mm.
And I know, you know, it's certainly gone up the agenda. The AONB team have been looking at dark skies and looking to celebrate them more. And they do want to do some guidance, which I think would be very useful. Other AONBs have published guidance. So I think that might be something as a priority for the AONB team.
Yeah, I mean, is it better to apply and fail than think, well, we might not be quite criteria compliant, so we won't bother applying, because it's a process, isn't it? There's a lot, no doubt, a lot of form filling.
Yes. Yeah.
And an officer time and resource to be dedicated to it. So you know, it's a serious thing to consider whether we should look at it in those terms.
I mean, we can certainly feed back and say, you know, it's a request from this council.
Any thoughts? Mark?
Yeah, well, I was just going to sort of echo what Kathy said, really. I think as a partner in the organisation, one of the things that we ought to be doing perhaps more effectively is influencing what that organisation does on our behalf. So at the moment, we see the versions of the management plan will come here because they require sign off or adoption. We have an officer representative on the core management group. We've got a member representative on the core management group. I used to be the officer rep many moons ago. And one of the senses I got from it is that the AONB partnership largely determined its own priorities. So, if it looked at things like undergrounding power cables or grazing marshes or some other things, and we didn't, and this is me pointing fingers at myself here, we didn't routinely report back the work of the AONB partnership to yourselves or cabinet or elsewhere. So I suspect you have very little understanding, and I'm not being critical of you don't actually understand or know what the AONB partnership does. Periodically, the manager of the partnership used to come and do an annual presentation, but it was largely about accounting for the numbers and the expenditure. So I think there is a place for this for us, the working party or the council, I don't quite know where it sits at the moment, to be more sort of directive in what we would like the partnership to do on our behalf. And dark skies is an issue of the day. There have been other issues over the years. I think that the AONB partnership, I mean, it has got an officer that's doing a lot of work on dark skies work. But I think they probably arrived at that issue of their own volition rather than on behalf of the partners, would be my perception of it. They arrived at it sort of fortuitously rather than us saying to them, over the next 18 months, we'd like you to focus on dark skies. The management plan has got an action plan in the back, and that in particular, there are lots of actions, some of which are delivered by partner members and some of which are delivered by others. And I think a focused look at what the actions are and what the partnership is delivering on our behalf ought to figure in the next management review in the next cycle. I don't think we've got the luxury of declining this at this stage. We need an up-to-date-ish management plan in place. It's unfortunate that the manager of the partnership has been changing personnel. Things have perhaps not happened quite the way that they should have happened. But I think this sort of interim review, update the statutory sort of references and local plan references, get the plan adopted by all of the partners in the expectation that the next 18 months, 2 years will lead to a more fundamental review is the right place to be. If we look at the content of the plan, I'm sure you'll land on things that you think can be improved. Chairman's reference things like there's very little reference to conservation areas in there and other things. So I'm sure there are things we could improve upon. But I think it's better to have an adopted plan in place. 85% of the content we're very happy with, in the expectation that the message is that the next review is perhaps more engaged with the district partners and we have more influence over what goes into it. And that's a two-way process. I feel like I've been critical of the AONB officers in the group, but we also need to properly resource our role in terms of officer representation and attendance at meetings and so on to make that process work properly. So that's where I sit on it.
Thank you for that. Just before I go to members, we've got 4 coastal members I noticed with us today. We are in, fortunate to have such expertise amongst our ranks this morning. If I just go to you first, Ian Withington.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that it's important not to confuse dark skies with a designation or planning designation. Matthew can add some more detail to this, but the dark sky designations are for areas which are obviously particularly dark, but obviously provide the views and the astrological views of the skies from dedicated places. So you'll see there are very remote areas away from artificial lights, and for those specific purposes. They're not designations which we can come along and say, right, we're going to have one in the middle of the town, in the middle of the village, used on planning functions or reasons of glazing and so forth. They're very much different. Policies within our evidence or our local plan supported by our evidence are more to do with the character of that landscape and the value features of a landscape, which very much come through in the landscape study, which Happy and I produced on the SDGs. So that nocturnal reference to the character is the link in to planning.
Okay. Thank you for that. Kathy, do you want to come back on that before I go to members?
Yes, I think I absolutely endorse what Ian is saying, that an international dark sky designation is not a planning designation. I think the dark skies have gone up the agenda nationally within the AONB member family, and I think that's probably where the dark sky status, which a lot of the dark sky sites are within other AONBs around the country. So I think there's quite a lot to be gained from collaboration with people who, are working like in the Lake District. I know they have a lighting guidance. So there's definitely things to be gained by being part of the wider AONB family. But yes, it's embedded in our landscape character assessment, and that is taken through to our local plan policies.
So, how can we promote the duty to cooperate amongst, all the players with AONBs, and how can this, as it were, debate, proceed and gain traction of consistency, I should say?
So I don't think there'd be anything wrong as our membership of the organisation. We are a member on the AONB partnership. For us to say to the partnership, on our behalf, we'd like you to focus over the coming period on these projects, and one of them is to consider the ability or the chances of designating a dark sky reserve. It's about using that resource. They've got officers there who are working on our behalf. We can say to them, we contribute staff, we contribute money. We'd like you to focus on these issues which are important to us. Other partners might have different issues they'd like the AONB partnership to focus on. And we can say, we support the management plan as is, but we'd like to be more actively involved in the future action plan and the work of the partnership. And one of the things we're particularly concerned about you looking at is, are there parts of the AONB which would meet the criteria for dark sky reserve status? They've looked at that already. I know that and I think the view was we struggled to get through the sort of rigor of the application process and actually come up to the standard that is required. There's sort of 2 tiers. There's locally designated dark sky observatory sites. We've got those where you can largely go and look at the night sky, but an internationally designated dark sky reserve is a very different beast and a much more rigorous process. But if we wanted the AONB partnership to re-look at that and to come back to us and act in a sort of advisory way, and Kathy can come to a meeting in 6 months' time or whatever and say, well, we've looked at this. These are the qualifying criteria. These are the reasons why we think we might have a chance or why we don't have a chance. We intend to make an application. I think that's how the relationship between us and the partnership should work. So we get, you know, good value for money out of it and influence what they're doing. Because there are other areas of work where, you know, where we might not think they had a great deal of value, but they'll be very important for some of the other partners that fund the partnership. I'm looking towards the member rep here and hoping I've not said anything that's too controversial. I think that's reasonable.
Ian, do you want to come in briefly and then
Yeah,
I'll go to members?
I think that to what Mark said there. Obviously, it's a management plan, and the way the recommendation here was worded, the plan is a material consideration. So it gives its council, it can use the plan in its judgment or reaching its conclusions, but it doesn't set policy. The local plan sets a policy, and officers can then use it. So there is a linkage here that you have to. This can't trump our own policies. There has to be a link. So it's not future working, really.
Okay, thank you for that. So I go first to the portfolio holder, just so that viewers are aware. Councillor Fitch-Tillett, would you like to
Thank you, Mr.
kick us
Chairman.
off?
Mark has mentioned, and I'm glad he has, that over the last year and a bit, the partnership has really been a little bit of a state of flux. There has been a great change in the officer lead and the representation, added to which we had the publication of the Glover report, which changed quite a lot of our management plan. This at the moment is a quick refresh, if you like, to carry us through until we can actually implement as much of the Glover report as physically possible. I'm the vice chairman of the Coast Partnership, and the chairman is Councillor Andrew Jemison, who's county councillor. We have an absolutely excellent restructured team. It is actually overseen at the moment by the landscapes team at County Council, but we are still trying to settle everything down and get a proper coastal manager in place. I'm glad you mentioned the family of the AONBs, because once a year there is a AONB chairman's meeting. Obviously in the last few years it's been a bit either online or a little bit difficult to get together. Normally we would meet in London on a yearly basis, and that's the time when we bring up subjects such as, you know, highlighting the dark skies with the rest of the AONB family. So that's something Kathy and I will take back when we go to core management group, which is I think in a couple of weeks' time. It might even be next week. My diary's a bit manic since I got back from holiday, so I'm not sure which week is week yet. But I would thoroughly recommend this refresh. We've had an awful lot of work on it, haven't we, Kathy? And Kathy's been absolutely brilliant in supporting and criticising and coming up and, you know, not just sitting back and saying, yes, this is right. She's really gone to everything, which is a great support to me, and I thank her gratefully. Happy to take any questions if necessary. Either Kathy and I can help you out, but it is quite interesting. If you look at Appendix 2, supporting documents, there you have a page and a half. And I suppose most of those are probably going to hundreds of pages of all the things that we have to go through and actually work together to implement within our management plan. It's quite a challenge.
Put the glossary together. I keep banging the drum on this, has got to be applauded. It's one of the best glossaries I think I've ever come across. So congratulations to the the glossary person that put it together. Councillor Fredericks, and then Councillor Holiday. Councillor Fredericks, over to you.
Thank you so much to all the officers that worked on this, and also to Angeli for ferociously protecting our coast and AONB. I as the Munsley ward member, I look at the map and I see the familiar bite out of the line of AONB of Munsley, and I was just wondering if that's going to be, is that going to be reconsidered as part of the plan? No.
We are not intending at this stage to change any boundaries of the AONB. There was a bit of a fight in West Norfolk about Old Hunstanton, was it, Cathy? Can you remember? And basically it almost goes to the stage where you need an act of parliament. So I'm afraid it's gone into too difficult trade.
That's all right. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Holiday, over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Victoria.
Very nice to see this. Thank you very much, those who worked on it. I had a couple of observations, a couple of questions. I had a question about no lighting guidance, which you've addressed already. I see the signage guidance, but no lighting guidance. So the very least you'd expect an associated guidance, but I'd be with Councillor Brown about going further than that. Really do feel that that's important on the ground. I had a question about GRAMS payments. I've asked before where these are going, how these, who decides how they're spent. And I feel that the people on the ground don't have enough say about how they should be spent, because we see the damage that's being done and would have a view on that. And I've spoken to John Jones about this several occasions and we haven't really made any progress. So I'd be grateful for some help with that. I was interested to see how we compare against others, and perhaps you can pick that up at the conference, how our AONB compares to others. And specifically regarding that, I noticed out of 7 conditions of the AONB, 5 are amber. And of those, we've lost a green to amber on this watch, and the other ambers have just continued being amber. I suppose it's good they haven't gone red, but what's the assurance that this document is actually protecting our fantastic countryside and shoreline? Thank you.
On that last point, I think, the condition monitoring is the key one really that should be influencing the priorities and the actions. And that's something that I certainly have been saying and will continue to keep saying. And I think the new team are well aware of that. And they are, looking to leave us a lot more funding based on these priorities. So I think over the next period, things will start to change. Generally, the projects have been fairly small scale, but they are, with a lot of this changing environmental land payments, they are looking at more landscape scale projects. So I think that could benefit. And I think the AONB teams could be the sort of levers for that. And the new team in place are well aware of that. And I think they are trying to capitalise on that. Yep.
Shall I do the tariff payments, the GRAMS stuff? GRAMS is Green Infrastructure Recreational Avoidance Mitigation Strategies. GRAMS because it sounds better. It's the notion that we're collecting tariff payments off of developers. And those tariff payments are used to mitigate against visitor pressures on internationally designated wildlife sites. Notion being that the more houses you build, the more dog walkers go to Clyde Bird Reserve and the more damage they do when they're there. That's the underlying purpose of GRAMS payments. We've got so far at the moment an agreement across the entirety of Norfolk to collect a standard tariff from every house builder, £278 or something of that nature springs to mind. And we've been collecting those tariffs and pooling them since the 31st of March last year. I say collecting, they're payable on commencement of development. So there'll be planning permissions that have been granted subject to payments being made, and those payments have not yet been received. So every local authority has agreed to collect the payments, and every local authority is collecting them and pooling them. What's not in place yet is an agreement about how the payments will be spent and administered. The current proposals are that a joint body will be set up across the county with a member representative on it from each member organisation, which will establish the rules for distribution and spending the funds, and will receive bids against the fund to draw down by the various site owners and managers. That mechanism is not yet established. And a centralised piece of work is being done on reviewing the capacity of individual sites to manage their own impacts. So essentially, you know, if you've got a site that is very well managed, very well resourced, then you can largely leave it alone. If you've got another site that's not very well managed and not very well resourced, you might want to direct some funding towards that particular project. The relevance of the AONB partnership is it's not their tariff payment, it's not for them to spend. But Kings Lynn Borough Council did enter into a service level agreement with the AONB partnership that the AONB would vet applications for funding. They've been running this parallel system of collecting monies for quite a long time, and they asked the AONB partnership to receive and vet applications and make recommendations for expenditure back to their cabinet or council meetings. And in the future, we expect a separate sort of panel to be set up, as I say, with North Norfolk members. Victoria could do it if she wants to, an officer representative who would look at, you know, the value of the contributions being received, a set of agreed rules about how that money should be spent, and they do the awkward sort of bun fight about does site A get the money or site B get the money, when and how is it drawn down, how is it accounted for, how is it monitored, so you get an annual monitoring report. There'll be an employed responsible individual and a legal obligation, probably sat with a county council or somebody like that, as the backstop for ensuring that all the sort of, you know, right procedures and governance arrangements are in place. So the short answer is we're collecting the money, but not yet spending it. Don't ask me how much money there is in the pot, because I don't know the answer, but there'll be, you know, sums of money are being collected in order to discharge that legal obligation under the habitat regulations. And in the future, it could deliver some quite exciting projects. You know, it will, in total, the fund's worth about £17 million over the next sort of 20 years or so. So there's some, you know, substantial potential resource in there to be directed towards wildlife protection sort of measures, which I think will be well received locally.
I have to say, I do admire your tie this morning, Gerard. So Councillor Mancini Boyle, would you like to address?
I suppose my question is to Kathy, really. I mean, it's a great piece of work. I did actually read quite a lot of it, but there's so much of it, and I'm not really used to the areas. So my question is really when you do the new review, are you going to bolt on some of the good stuff you've got now and add other stuff on, or are you going to completely strip it down to the bare knuckles and start again? And my second question is probably because I don't know, is do you actively get input from local members, or is it just your team, or do you have like a consultation with various members who are experts in the area as well? Is that how you do it? Thanks, Kathleen.
I think, well, we're waiting for guidance from the Glover Review as to how they want us to undertake the next tranche of management plans. I imagine that we will look at this and think that this works really well, so carry that forward. I think also, you know, there's a lot of benefit in referring again to the wider AONB family and finding out in other AONBs what works well, and sharing ideas. So I think that will be a key part of this new guidance, I imagine. So definitely taking forward good things and reviewing what doesn't work so well. Remind me of your second bit of your question.
Sorry, Kathy, that was how much involvement do you have with the local members?
Well, this restructure, there's a sort of core management group, and then there are subgroups to look at particular projects. So in those groups, there are, you know, they go to wider partners like the RSPB get involved. If it's in a particular area, most certainly the local members would be invited to participate, and any relevant stakeholders. They really are start doing a lot better in going wider to the relevant people who may have the expertise to assist. Yeah, certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just mindful of the clock actually, and I'm just mindful also that this item of business is about this, whether we are content with the update rather than what will happen in the future. I think there's possibly scope for another discussion another day on that. And from my point of view, I'm very content to propose that this we follow the recommendation.
Thank you. Mindful of what Councillor Dixon said, quite right. Mark, if we could have a conversation about that payment to developers that you mentioned, I think that would be actually quite a good payment for holiday lets as well per year. But thank you. I know it's a conversation for a different time.
There is a tariff payment for those who run holiday accommodation as well. It's not just a house builder tariff. Any form of development that puts pressure, visitor pressure on designated sites has to make a payment. So there is can't remember the number, I'm looking in Ian's direction. I think we count it on number of bed spaces or something. There's a formula.
It's
Yeah.
net gain residential, and that includes tourism development. So where there is a net gain in bed spaces, the tariff is, I think, £187 per bed space. That extends to hotels, that extends to whether well, it doesn't matter on the use of the house, it's the bed space of the residential dwelling. But it does extend to campsites, caravan sites, where there's a formula to break it down into full-time equivalent, if you like. So everybody net gain will pay.
Lovely, thank you.
Just looking at paragraph 1.5 of your report, Kathy, and just I may be misunderstanding this, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have expected to see the Glaven Valley Rural Conservation Area designation in there. I'm sure I will be inundated with people asking me why it's not there.
I mean, certainly, you know, I've said new supplementary planning documents, e.g. So there may be more. I mean, I think conservation area appraisals have the status of SPDs, don't they? Once they're adopted.
Well, there's certainly material
But anyway, yes,
considerations.
most certainly, yes. That would be.
So we can wheedle that in at some point, no doubt.
Mhm, yep.
So, sorry. So are we saying that these are interim modifications subject to a more formal review at a later date? Or are we saying we don't really need to alter the recommendation?
So I think that wording in interim approval or whatever might have stemmed from a conversation that I had separately with the chair before the meeting. On reflection, I think we should ignore the word interim because it opens up fruitful areas of challenge for those people who want to say, well, you've adopted a plan, but you recognise in your own terms it's only an interim measure and therefore it should get less weight. I think we adopt it, we approve it, whatever the wording is, and our separate expectation is it will be followed by a quick review, which is in hand anyway. But I think using the word interim potentially undermines the status of a document in a way we wouldn't want to happen. So I'm content with the wording in the recommendation.
So, yeah, so I think Lauren's made a note of that. It's quite important. Bottom of page 22, by the way, appendix B. Should the management plan period be 2014 to 2019, not 29? Yeah, okay. Right, so we have a proposal from Councillor Dixon for the recommendation, which is that members of the Planning Policy and Built Work Heritage Working Party recommend to Cabinet the contents of the updated Norfolk Coast AONB Management Plan 2019 to 2024 are endorsed for use as a material planning consideration, which will chime with our Development Committee members in the determination of planning applications. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Heinrich is seconder, Councillor Dix is proposed. All those in favour? And Angie? You're not a voting member, you're not subbing today, sorry, my mistake. Unanimous. Thank you. Now we are at 11:35. We've got one more item to go. Take the temperature in the room. Would anybody like a 10-minute comfort break? You would? Right, that's unanimous. Ian, the floor is yours for the next item, which is local plan update, is it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go straight into it. There is a presentation that comes with this, which Lauren will put up. I will just start. I'll keep it as brief as I can and take some questions at the end. There's 4 stages to this presentation. Current areas of focus of our work. I just want to bring you up to speed. Next stages, and then a little bit more information on background papers and a little bit of a neighbourhood plan update. So current areas of work. Essentially, I think you know where we are. We've been working in the review of representations and schedule of proposed modifications. That work is now complete with the sign off at last working party and subsequent cabinet. The next stage is to combine those schedules into a single schedule, which is required for submission. And we will be doing that shortly. Accompanying this work is a track change version of a local plan. So we will have to put those modifications into the local plan, and then we will have a consolidated version of what we are proposing. That's to be scheduled shortly. And I'll just touch on that there are actually 5 schedules that we're working on. You've seen schedules 3, 4, and 5, which are the ones that require decisions. The other schedules are consolidation of the representations in policy order, if you like, and also alphabetical order. So although they're all available on the portal, we'll be consolidating them down and making them into hard copies. The team is really continuing that work now. They are reviewing the challenges and the issues that have been raised through those consultations and undertaking sort of early high-level rebuttal work to understand what those challenges are and to build up our response. So a little bit of preemptive work on that is going ahead. As part of that work, there's also a process of what we call statement of common grounds, which we'll be going into shortly. So we'll try and highlight the areas where there is common ground between site promoters, for example, and areas where we don't agree with as well, to narrow down what those challenges are and help the inspector and help any subsequent examination drill down to the key issues, if you like. That can take a little bit of time, but that is preparation work which we're now doing. There are also background and topic papers, which we've touched on before. Majority of these have been consulted on at Reg 18 and Reg 19 stage. However, there are 1 or 2 new ones. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. We have a slide on that. The purpose really of these background papers, they bring together the evidence, they bring together the justification and reasoning on the topic area. And they go some way as to, again, helping the inspector clarify our position, but they're also clarifying our position within the council and across the team, so that we have a reference to justify and refer back to on subsequent challenges, and again at the inspector's examination process. Some of the documents, the background papers, are required for legal purposes to meet that test of legal tests. Quality statement, that's one of them. The cooperate statement, which Mark mentioned earlier as well. And those are ongoing. If I could have the next slide, please. So this slide will just give you a flavour of what needs to be done. I've titled it submission preparation. There is a process that we have to go through, what we call appointing a programme officer. And once this council has agreed to submit the local plan, we need a programme officer. That person's job is a go-between between the council and the inspector, and they coordinate the examination, and we feed back to them, and they feed back to us. So we never get to speak to the inspector. It keeps us impartial. So there's obviously a period of PINS liaison to iron out the timelines and the expectations around that. We would also be expected to set up an examination library, which would be an online resource where all of our submission documents, all of our evidence, all of our papers would be published in one consolidated piece of information, and all correspondence and examination matters would be published on that page. We just keep on building, it's iterative and keeps on going. We have to do legal compliance and sound self-assessments. So we'll be reviewing it against a standard PINS template and part of the submission document again. And I think I'm just listing some of the papers on this slide. So you've got your duty to cooperate statement, your qualities, the soundness, policies mapping updates as well. So some of those modifications which you've agreed require some slight changes in the mapping. So that's in hand to make sure that's followed through into the plan and the policies mapping. The next slide, please. So in addition to local plan work, we've got, I call them additional areas of work. Obviously, nutrient neutrality is an ongoing piece of work. We continue to do our monitoring function, 5-year housing land supply, housing delivery test, return flows to governments and the AMRs. These don't just materialise. Each one of those is 2-3 months of consolidated work by our monitoring officer to go out and review the land position, get up-to-date figures on completion works and deliveries, and keep his very, very detailed spreadsheets of everything. So he's hard at work at this time of year. He's just starting to go out so we can have a position for around April time. I won't go into detail on any of these. Obviously, we're involved in planning advice to our colleagues in DM. We have brownfield registers, self-build registers that continue work all year round, and they get published towards the end of the years. We've had the coastal SPT work, which came to this committee, consultation on that. It's currently out of consultation, so that will end in March. And we've had a very busy period on neighbourhood plans. And of course, we've got Elizabeth Jones to deal with, so we're keeping abreast of that, and we've had that report this morning. This slide is just a very much recap. So you've got the schedules there, which we are actively combining now. It's not an easy piece of work, but it's quite a large document, which needs considerable checking to make sure we've got all the numbers right and references right. The local development scheme, that's another statutory document that has to be submitted and has to be up to date. We approved that in December, so we've covered that one off. And once you've given us that authority to submit, obviously we've got some work to do, and we'll just start implementing that work. If I could very briefly just go on to the background papers. There's 17 or so of these in total, most of which you've seen before. They were consulted on at Reg 18, some of them were consulted on at Reg 19, and they cover the main areas, if you like. So Mark was talking about the approach to the housing target using the 2014 figures and the 2016 figures of the justification. That paper is giving us the inspector our position, basically how we've done it. And it would be a very useful source for us to refer to at the examination and sets the scene to our position on there. The distribution of growth paper, that brings together all the items we've discussed here on how we've produced the settlement hierarchy. It brings together the approach to the rural people or the rural settlements. It incorporates all the economic statistics which we did much earlier in the plan programme around the statistics for the villages, so the number of population, the density, the number of affordable housing, and that type of provides that profile. So we've combined them all. There is a paper, a background paper covering employment, which pulls out the employment strategy from the business studies the council undertook. And various ones. Infrastructure delivery plan is the key one. If there's appetite, I can bring the delivery schedule up at the end of this presentation. Which I know has been asked for by some to have another look at. But I just quickly mention it. There's housing construction standards. We haven't talked about those for a long time, but that's the paper that justifies the minimum space standards, accessible and adaptable homes policies, renewable energy. Again, it puts the meat behind the bones of the policies, telling the inspector and those obviously who wish to challenge that what our position is. There are also site assessment booklets which bring together all of our assessments that have been undertaken, the detailed site appraisals of every site and alternative. So our position on those is documented and available for all. And as I say, they all come together into an examination library. Although I say some of these are in progress, which they obviously are, they're very iterative, and the majority of them are complete. There's still work to do on all of them to bring them up to publishable standards. Once we have that library, we have to give reference numbers, we have to cross-reference, to put some paragraphs in, and in some of them, the information on NPPF references may need updating. So there's a bit of work to be done just to polish them off, if you like. I'll move on to neighbourhood plans. As I say, we've had a very busy year so far on neighbourhood plans. We have 2 plans at examination stage. The Blakeney neighbourhood plan has been under examination for some time. That report came out in January, and we are now actively working to produce a referendum version. And I've invited the Parish Council to a meeting to discuss that and the process. The report had 14 recommendations for modifications, and we've added another three to those. And we will incorporate those into that plan. And once we have a referendum version, I'll be able to bring that to you in a little bit more detail. The Holt neighbourhood plan is at examination now. I'm expecting the exam report very shortly this month. That plan itself, we've worked very closely with the town council since their previous submission was withdrawn, and very much slimmed down the neighbourhood plan. I believe their intention is to get it over the line and then potentially start again with a more detailed and more inclusive growth plan. And that'll obviously depend on future decisions of the town council. Other plans, Wells next to the sea, that's progressing nicely. They undertook consultation last year, I think mid last year, on their regulation 14. Since then, we gave them detailed feedback on that. In January, we conducted HRA and SEA screening reports, which are currently out for consultation with the statutory bodies. They recommend that they would have to do a formal HRA and a formal SEA plan, which will be the first neighbourhood plan. They have to do that too, but they're getting on with that because they've anticipated that. So I expect that plan sometime this year, to be honest. Other neighbourhood plans, Stalham is progressing quite slowly. They've appointed a consultant, and I haven't heard in the past few months of any progress on that, but it's sticking by. Play is going ahead. I think they are anticipating a local information events in March, mainly focusing on conservation and heritage, very much in the early stages. Victoria can no doubt add more to that if she's here today, if you're interested. And Overstrand and Munsley, I can report that there's very little activity going on there. In fact, I think the process is installed in those two. I don't know if there's any appetite, but I have a couple of slides on the LC whip. This was brought to this working party back in December. But I can quickly cover that off if it's it's covered in December. County Council work which we've just been involved in. It came to us out of the blue, but I think it's very important that we engage with it. So we've engaged with the process. It will produce these. It'll produce sort of mapping of potential routes, and this is a very early example. And of where potential improvements can be made to the cycling network and the walking network, and potential areas where they can do feasibility studies to find out the level of investment required. And so it's a county council program. They have obtained the funding. Our involvement is only to make sure that cross references to our strategies and our plans, and to get all the areas in that we feel are important. I believe you asked for an update that there is a public consultation scheduled on this. It was going to be in March, it's now being delayed until mid-May, 2-week window. I don't have the details. But obviously it gives the project team a little bit more time to add flesh to these maps. This was an earlier one from back in December. And they are actively growing. We have monthly contact with them, but they are growing in their detailed information and more routes. Hopefully when they go out to the local consultation involved the parish councils, they'll get a lot more detailed feedback on the local information. But there will be a very good source of potential improvements, and benefit will be to then link it back to our economic development and our economic strategies within investments in the future. So there's a coordination, if you like, of uses. Really, that's the update. I said if there's appetite, I could bring up the infrastructure delivery schedule. And we can do that if there is the appetite for it.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. In fact, I'd see that some more neighbourhood plans are coming on stream as a veteran of the first one at Corpusty Sax Thorpe. I know others disagree, but there we go. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering why this information wasn't circulated with the papers, or at least put on Modern Gov, because I think that would have enabled this last 10 or 15 minutes to have been perhaps questions rather than seeing it on the screen. It would have been more helpful.
Yeah, that's one view, isn't it? You know, we will have a session on the 1st of March at full council. That will be an opportunity to ask some questions for members, a step that we needn't take, but we've chosen to take. Because it could have been signed off by cabinet rather than full council, but we want to give members the opportunity to have a final look at it.
Well, yeah, I think there'd be a distinction in my mind between those items which require a substantive resolution. We're asking you to make a decision on something where my instinct would be there should always be a tabled paper and material in front of you in advance. Whereas what Ian's just presented is a sort of update for information about work on the team, what the team is doing. I would hope it's largely can just taken as read. It doesn't prompt too many questions. I was expecting, was going to anticipate the next question, that there's going to be a bit of a discussion around the infrastructure delivery paper. Councillor Dixon shaking his head there, but we've tabled that couple of times previously. I was hoping, to be honest, that this opportunity would be taken to put that paper up on the screen and go through the schedule of proposed infrastructure that's on the back of it. Again, it's a for information item, so I'm not expecting a decision, but I do feel or have felt that the working party wanted an opportunity to comment on the content of that paper and influence it. So
On the website, on the you know, if it why not on
well, it was circulated to all members before Christmas. So yeah.
Well, we don't normally publish verbal updates on ModGov. I mean, you know, if we do this for the infrastructure delivery plan and we've got 16 other background documents, what are we doing with those? We need to be even-handed in how we treat the process, don't we? Let's start off. Councillor Fredericks.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm going to have to go for another meeting.
That's very kind of you to inform us. Thank you for coming.
The only thing I may say that the background papers are contain nothing that the members have not seen, not approved. They are officer papers of which we consolidate our work and refine it and produce to justify the plan. There is no decisions within them. The infrastructure plan is brought to you for information only, because it is quite visual in that schedule. And we are quite happy to put it up on the screen now if you wish.
Well, the government doesn't put the budget red book up on
No.
for public debate at Westminster, does it? So I'm not sure that we should be doing you know, going to those lengths with any of our background papers, personally speaking. But I don't know what other members think.
I would agree with that.
Well, people have heard my views. We've heard Councillor Dixon's view. Are there any other views about this? If we're going to look. Well, to be fair, I don't think we've exactly avoided the opportunities to ask detailed questions. I mean, the local plans come to this working party regularly, hasn't it? And I don't think anyone can legitimately complain that they've not had the opportunity to rule the rod over our local plan procedures.
No, I think, to be fair, I mean, I've heard that frustration expressed. I think, we presented then a work programme with, I don't know, a couple of dozen items on it, not relevant necessarily to everybody. And all you had in the background papers and the reports was a single line that said update on local plan progress or whatever. So you had no prior knowledge of the width of that material and everything that was going to be presented. And I think the point that Councillor Dixon's sort of saying is, how can I come to the meeting having thought about the Wells neighbourhood plan or whatever it might be and ask pertinent questions if I don't know it's actually going to be on the agenda for discussion. So there's a couple of things there is about the description of the item, verbal item update on to include X, Y, and Z, so and the presentation that was given would have been available for some time. I would have thought we could have perhaps circulated it in some way. But I think, I don't want to sound too defensive about it, Chair, but I can see where that frustrations come from. We've got a lot of material that's presented at the meeting, and yet we've got no or little prior knowledge of what's going to be put in front of us. And we want the opportunity to engage with the material and ask questions. I think that's the general point that's being made. I will revert back to, we've got no decisions. The background papers are all to do with previous decisions you've made. There's nothing novel or unusual in them. It's material that we're all very familiar with. We're documenting, showing our workings, if you like, documenting how we've got to where we've got to. And I think we've reached the point, I will say now, where collectively we need to move on and get the plan submitted. The officers have got a lot of work to do behind the scenes to get beyond this point. So I hope members would generally endorse the sort of direction of travel and what we've done.
So that was the intention, was to basically advise of the amount of work that's going on. We're not sitting here idly. We have an enormous amount of work that sits behind this. So I was just advising you all that is where we are and what we are working.
I mean, the easy option would have been to have kicked the local plan into the long grass. I mean, we've every excuse for doing so with the MPPF, with neutrality, da. But we're pretty intent that, this process started at Reg 18, virtually the month that this administration was elected 4 years ago. We do need to progress it. I don't think it should be a matter for the next administration to do justice to the work that we've done over the last 4 years in the council and to officers who have worked so diligently to promote it. So I think there's a balance to be struck here, and you probably are going to expect me to say that we need to crack on and we need to get it to full council on the 1st of March. I mean, I'm quite happy to pick up any queries on the infrastructure delivery plan, behind the scenes before the 1st of March, if that helps at all.
Mr. Chairman, I wholly endorse the need to progress this. And this hasn't been going just for 4 years. This has been going for 6 years at least. So, and
4 years for me, but
yeah,
I appreciate longer.
6+ I would say for others. And it is time that we got this off. There is no real excuse, and I think it would be very remiss of us if we failed to get this completed in this administration. So that's sort of some of the frustration, I suppose, that I feel that we do need to do this, and we need to get on and crack on, and it needs to be done and dusted. In respect of the infrastructure delivery plan, I've had the advantage of a one-to-one discussion with Mark on that, but I do think, and I think that was part of our conversation, that there is something that perhaps Mark could do to share that more widely in a meeting of this kind, so that we have a better understanding of where the infrastructure delivery plan fits within the overall plan and the allocations, and where we expect to see the all-important infrastructure adequately considered and adequately integrated in the plan. And I think that's the bit that's where we're missing at the moment. As I said, I personally have a better understanding of that, but I'm not sure that that's something that every member of this committee has had, and I think we do need that at some point.
Well, if we accept that as a premise and that we need to address it, my question is, I'm going to be duck it slightly and say I'm not in charge of organising work on the local plan, so I'll defer to either Mark or Ian as to how how we need to address this.
I think if I could just say, what the infrastructure delivery plan does is actually build on the infrastructure delivery statement, which was published at Reg 18 stage and is on our website. It's always been there. What it does, it pulls together all the infrastructure requirements within the local plan itself. So everything that is a requirement in the policies is already in the plan and you are fully aware of. All this does is, first of all, the document pulls together contextual information. So it's adding the meat on the bone, if you like, to the water situation, why water is under stress in the district. And then it outlines Anglian Water's investment strategies, and then it pulls together where the site allocations specifically are calling for any level of investment. I'm using water for example, but whether it's transport, whether it's water, anything else, it puts them into a schedule and says, there it is, that is requirement. You members of this working party, you've seen it. It doesn't do anything other than that. The purpose is it is a live document, and it will be updated as we go on and new information comes to light. So neutrality section obviously will get updated the time of submission, because that will have moved on. There's solutions on the horizon, so that can go in. But other than that, there is nothing different within this document which you have not already seen. But it will help, to answer your question, Councillor Dixon, it will help going forward the council align its priorities. So where our economic strategy or action plan, as may be, there is internal cross-references to these documents which can be used. You can see the priorities of infrastructure in the local plan, so therefore you should see the priorities in investing from an economic development perspective, and then that leads to the corporate plan. So there are internal uses to this document, and this is the first time we've done one, but I would hope that as we go forward, that will get more embedded within across those departments and be used in a fruitful way to help gain the investment that we require.
So just to try and finish the debate off, I think I can see a way forward here. So I think Councillor Dixon usefully confirmed he didn't see this as a sort of contingency that had to be done prior to local plan submission. He's content that the local plan can be submitted, that the underlying evidence is okay. I think he made a reasonable point that raising the profile of infrastructure delivery, how it works, and what's in that document will be of interest collectively to this group. I don't see why, when the dust settles, we get the plans submitted. I'm not going to offer to bring it to the next meeting, but at some point, if we had infrastructure delivery as a topic area for discussion, you can include the infrastructure delivery plan and other areas if you like, because it's an issue which is raised out there. It's the most often heard thing, isn't it? How does the planning department commission and provide health infrastructure? What is our role? So for us to sit here with a document and give you the opportunity of explaining that, and you can ask questions, I think is an important area of work. So I'm going to take that away. I've heard what was said, and I think at some point in the future, a substantive item broadly on how does infrastructure delivery happen within and outside of the local plan as a discussion item or whatever would be a useful thing to have on the agenda. And I think that, yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dixon. So we're asked to note this update, I think, if so there's no vote necessary. It's just a question of note. Thank you very much, Ian, for putting that together. So I think we've got no exempt matters under item 12. Oh, sorry, going ahead of myself. Item 11, no press or public present. Number 12, no exempt matters under item 12, and no exempt business under item 13. So at 11 minutes past 12, I intend to close the meeting, if that's okay with everybody. Please don't forget to reset your